Hermes did not hesitate when the summons reached him. He never did. Messages were his domain. Movement was his nature. When a task was given, he carried it. That was how the world remained connected. This message arrived without ceremony. No gathering of gods. No declaration from Olympus. It was placed into his hands quietly, as though it had always been there. Hermes looked at it once. Only once. It was not sealed. That alone was unusual. Messages meant for delivery were almost always closed, their contents protected until they reached the proper place. This one lay open, its words visible, unchanged by distance or delay. Hermes did not read them. That, too, was habit. Messengers did not need knowledge, only direction. Still, something about the message resisted motion. Not physically. It was light, simple, but the moment Hermes turned to leave, the air around him seemed to slow, as if the task itself were uncertain about being carried. "You will take it," came the voice behind him. Hermes turned. No god stood there. No figure emerged from the shadows. The instruction had not come from a mouth. It had come from the space where decisions sometimes formed before anyone claimed them. Hermes nodded. He always did. He stepped onto the road. The first stretch was familiar, stone paths worn smooth by centuries of passing. Hermes moved easily, his steps quiet, his pace unhurried. Messages were patient things. But as Olympus fell behind him, the message grew heavier. Not in his hands. In its meaning. Hermes did not know why. He crossed the first threshold between realms. Normally, messages settled at that point, finding their direction, aligning themselves with destination. This one did not. It remained. Unfinished. Hermes slowed. He had never slowed before. He adjusted his grip and continued forward. The road ahead stretched long and indistinct, branching into paths that did not usually open for him. Hermes felt it then. Not doubt. A quiet recognition. This message had not been written to arrive. And yet, he was carrying it. The first place Hermes stopped was a place where messages usually rested. Not arrived. Rested. It lay between realms, where roads loosened their certainty and destinations became suggestions. Messengers knew it well. Here, words slowed. Here, intent clarified. Hermes had passed through it more times than he could count. This time, the place did not welcome the message. The air thinned as he entered. Not colder. Quieter. The stones beneath his feet lost their markings, as though the road itself had forgotten where it led. Hermes paused. That was new. Messages were meant to be indifferent to such places. They carried purpose, and purpose carried them through. Hermes adjusted his pace and stepped forward again. The message resisted, not by stopping him, by refusing to settle. Normally, at this point, a message would grow lighter, its meaning aligning with destination, its urgency easing. This one did the opposite. Hermes felt its weight sharpen, as if the words within it were drawing inward, pulling away from the road ahead. He looked down at it. Still open. Still unchanged. He did not read it. Instead, he listened. The place itself began to speak. Not in language. In absence. No wind moved. No echoes followed his steps. Even time felt less certain here. Hermes had delivered messages through war and storm, through divine anger and mortal grief. This silence was different. It was not emptiness. It was refusal. Hermes reached the center of the place, a flat expanse of pale stone where messengers often paused before continuing on. Nothing waited for him there. No sign. No direction. Only a single understanding forming slowly, unwelcome but clear. This message did not belong to any destination he knew. Hermes stood still. He could turn back. That option existed. It always did. But messengers were not chosen for hesitation. They were chosen for continuation. Hermes took another step forward. The place did not stop him, but it did not release him either. And for the first time, Hermes wondered not where the message was going, but what would change if it arrived. The road shifted again after Hermes left the quiet place behind. It narrowed, becoming less certain, as though the path itself were considering whether it should continue to exist. Hermes followed it anyway. He had always followed. At the end of the narrowing road stood a small dwelling, neither temple nor home, but something between. It was built from stone worn smooth by time, its doorway open, its interior dimly lit. Someone waited inside. Hermes felt it before he saw them. This was a place where messages were sometimes received before they were meant to be understood. Hermes stepped forward. The figure within the dwelling did not rise. They did not bow. They did not extend a hand. They simply looked at Hermes with eyes that had seen too many endings. "You carry something that should not be brought here," the figure said calmly. Hermes stopped. That had never been said to him before. "I carry what I am given," he replied. The figure shook their head. "This one," they said, "was meant to remain still." Hermes felt the weight shift again. "Then why was it given to me?" he asked. The figure did not answer at once. They stood slowly, moving with care, as though even small actions might disturb something delicate. "Because sometimes," they said, "movement is the only way to understand what must not move." Hermes held out the message. The figure did not take it. "I will not receive it," they said quietly. Hermes hesitated. That was rare. Receivers could delay. They could question. But refusal was uncommon. "This message will change things," the figure continued. "Not loudly, not immediately, but it will make endings arrive before they are ready." Hermes felt the words settle. Still, he did not withdraw the message. "I do not choose which words travel," he said. The figure met his gaze. "And yet," they replied, "you are choosing now whether they continue." Hermes lowered the message. He had not realized he was holding it so tightly. "I will go on," he said at last. The figure stepped aside, clearing the doorway. "Then you will not return unchanged," they said. Hermes nodded once and stepped past them. Behind him, the dwelling faded into the road, as though it had never been a place meant to stay. Ahead, the path widened again. Hermes continued forward. But the question had been placed. And questions, once placed, traveled far. The road did not announce that it was changing. It never did. Hermes noticed only because the ground beneath his feet began to feel unfamiliar. Not rough, not broken, simply less certain. The air thinned again, but this time it carried weight, not silence, but anticipation. Hermes slowed his pace. He knew this region. Not well. Messengers passed through it rarely, and only when the task demanded something more than delivery. This was a border where words did not simply arrive. They stayed. Here, messages lingered long enough to be felt. Hermes crossed the threshold. The world on the other side held itself differently. Light did not fall in a single direction. Shadows softened, stretching without edge. Paths appeared only as they were needed, forming beneath his feet and dissolving behind him. Hermes had delivered messages to gods, to mortals, to places that no longer existed. This place was not waiting to receive anything. It was listening. The message in his hands reacted immediately. It did not grow heavier. It grew warm. Hermes stopped. He had never felt that before. Messages carried urgency. They carried consequence. They did not carry warmth. He held it carefully now, as one might hold something living that had not asked to be born. A presence moved nearby, not approaching, observing. Hermes did not turn. He spoke instead. "I am only passing through." The presence did not answer. It did not need to. Hermes continued walking. With each step, memory surfaced, not his own, but impressions left behind by others who had crossed here. Fragments of hesitation, moments of restraint, decisions unmade. This border had absorbed them all. Hermes felt the weight of that, not as burden, as warning. He reached the center of the region where the ground leveled into a wide, open stillness. Nothing stood there. No gate, no guardian, only a realization settling slowly into place. If the message crossed fully, it would not return unchanged. Hermes stood for a long moment. He could still turn back. The road behind him had not closed. Yet, Hermes adjusted his grip and stepped forward again. The warmth deepened. The presence nearby receded. The border accepted his choice. And somewhere, far beyond this place, something waited that did not yet know a message was coming. The path beyond the border did not lead forward. It curved. Not sharply. Not away. Inward. Hermes followed it until the air began to cool and the ground beneath his feet darkened to a familiar stone. He recognized the place before he saw it. The stillness here was older. He had crossed this threshold many times before, but never with a message like this. The underworld did not open with gates. It welcomed passage by absence. No resistance. No invitation. Hermes stepped inside. The road sloped gently downward, lit by a soft, distant glow that never cast shadows. Souls moved quietly nearby, their passage uninterrupted, their attention turned inward. They did not see Hermes. They never did. He was movement itself here, unremarkable, necessary, unchallenged. Until he reached the river. Karen stood waiting, as he always did. The ferryman did not look surprised to see Hermes, but his gaze fell immediately to the message. His grip tightened on the pole of his skiff. "That does not belong here," Karen said. Hermes did not answer at once. "It does not belong anywhere," Karen continued quietly. "That is the problem." Hermes held the message closer. "I am carrying it," he said. Karen studied him for a long moment. "You have carried many things," he replied. None of them questioned whether they should arrive. Hermes said nothing. The river flowed on, unconcerned. "I will not take it across," Karen said at last. Hermes had expected delay. He had not expected refusal. "This is not defiance," Karen added. "It is memory." Hermes met his gaze. "What will it cost," Hermes asked, "if it crosses?" Karen looked away. "Something that will not return," he said. Hermes understood. The river was not a boundary. It was a decision. Hermes did not step into the skiff. Instead, he turned away from the water's edge. Karen did not stop him. The ferryman watched as Hermes walked back up the path, the glow dimming slowly behind him. The underworld accepted his restraint. Hermes felt the message change again. Not lighter, more deliberate. He had crossed many realms. Now he carried their hesitation with him. Hermes did not return to the roads he knew. The path carried him away from thresholds and borders and into a region where destinations loosened their hold on travelers. Here, roads did not lead from one place to another. They wandered. Hermes felt it immediately. His steps no longer shortened the distance. The horizon remained steady no matter how long he walked. This was not resistance. It was delay. The message responded in kind. It no longer pressed forward. It rested in his hands with an unfamiliar patience, as though it had accepted that movement was no longer the most important thing. Hermes slowed. He allowed it. He had never done that before. Along the road, figures appeared and faded, travelers between moments, messengers whose tasks had ended without resolution. They did not speak. They did not watch him. They simply passed, each carrying the quiet weight of something unfinished. Hermes recognized the feeling. It was not failure. It was restraint. He walked for a long while. Time stretched thin here, not lengthening but loosening its shape. Hermes felt memory surface, tasks completed, words delivered, consequences unfolding long after he had moved on. This time, he could not move on. The road curved again. Hermes found himself approaching a small settlement, not a city, not a village, but a resting place for those who had paused too long. Low stone structures stood quietly, their entrances open, their interiors dim and warm. Hermes entered one. Inside sat an old man, his posture relaxed, his eyes alert but untroubled. "You're early," the man said calmly. "I do not know when I am," Hermes replied. The man smiled. "Then you are exactly where you should be." Hermes held out the message. The man did not reach for it. "You won't give it to me," the man said gently. Hermes lowered his hand. "No," he agreed. The man nodded. "Then stay," he said, "until you remember why movement once mattered." Hermes Saturday. Not because he was told to, because the road had stopped asking him to continue. They spoke for a long while, not about the message, about choices that had been delayed until they were no longer needed, about words withheld that allowed understanding to grow. When Hermes rose to leave, the message felt unchanged. But Hermes was not. He stepped back onto the road. It opened this time, not eagerly, but willingly. The delay had served its purpose. Hermes walked on, and the road, at last, began to move again. The road did not return Hermes to where he had left. It rarely did. Instead, it opened into a region closer to the waking world, a place where mortal and divine concerns overlapped without touching. Here, the air carried tension, not conflict, anticipation. Hermes felt it immediately. The message in his hands responded. It did not pull forward. It pulsed, slowly, as though something far away had begun to notice its existence. Hermes followed the road until it overlooked a wide plain where mortals gathered. A city lay below, quiet, orderly, its streets lit softly against the night. Nothing appeared wrong. And yet, Hermes sensed uncertainty moving through it. Decisions were being delayed. Councils met without conclusion. Voices softened where they once pressed. The city was waiting, not for a sign, for permission. Hermes understood then that messages did not need to arrive to have influence. The mere possibility of arrival was enough. He walked through the city unseen, past doorways where lamps burned late, past figures standing at windows, their thoughts restless. They felt the approaching weight without knowing its source. Hermes paused near the center of the city. The message warmed again, not urgently, responsibly. If delivered, it would settle everything at once. The uncertainty would end. So would something else. Hermes felt it clearly now. Growth does not occur when answers arrive complete. It occurs in the space before they do. Hermes turned away from the city. The road accepted the turn without resistance. Behind him, the city continued waiting. And waiting, for once, was not a failure. Hermes carried the message onward. But now, he carried knowledge with it. The road narrowed as Hermes walked. Not into uncertainty this time, but into precision. Each step carried intention. He recognized the feeling. This was not a wandering path. It was a destination revealing itself slowly enough to allow refusal. The landscape changed subtly, stone smoothing beneath his feet, air growing still, light settling into a steady glow that did not flicker. Hermes had been here before. Not often. This was a place where outcomes were shaped before they were named. A quiet region where decisions waited to be understood rather than announced. At the center of it stood a structure without walls. A circular space, open to the sky, its ground etched with faint markings older than Olympus itself. Hermes stepped inside. The message in his hands grew completely still. For the first time, it did not respond to movement. It had arrived. Hermes did not release it. He stood at the center of the space and waited. Something stirred. Not a god. Not a voice. A presence formed slowly, a convergence of intention, memory, and consequence. This was where the message had been written, not by a single hand, by necessity. Hermes understood then what the message contained. Not instructions, not prophecy, permission. The message did not demand action. It allowed it. Allowed an ending to occur before something else could grow. Allowed certainty to replace patience. Allowed closure before understanding had fully formed. Hermes felt the weight of that clearly now. This message was not dangerous. It was premature. That was its harm. Hermes lowered his gaze. He could deliver it. The place would accept it. The world would adjust. Everything would proceed cleanly, efficiently, unchallenged. Hermes felt the stillness around him waiting. He remained there for a long time. The sky did not change. The markings did not glow brighter. Nothing pressed him. This place respected choice. At last, Hermes stepped back. The space did not resist. It did not close. It simply remained. Hermes turned away with the message still in his hands. Behind him, the place did not follow. It had done its part. And Hermes, for the first time since receiving the task, knew with certainty what completion would truly cost. Hermes did not leave the place at once. He walked its outer edge slowly, as though tracing the boundary of a thought that had not yet decided what shape it wished to take. The message remained unchanged, but the world around it did not. The longer Hermes delayed, the more the stillness began to attract attention. Not from mortals, from order, the kind that does not speak unless something has gone noticeably out of alignment. Hermes felt it first as a tightening of space. The air did not grow heavy. It grew precise. Paths aligned more cleanly. Distances shortened. Movement became efficient again. This was the divine rhythm reasserting itself. Hermes understood what it meant. Delays were tolerated. Refusal was not. He stepped onto the road. This time, it did not wander. It led. Hermes moved quickly, not because he was urged forward, but because hesitation was no longer invisible. Along the road, figures appeared, not obstacles, not guards, but witnesses. Minor gods of boundary and measure. Spirits who governed sequence and timing. They did not stop him. They watched. Hermes met their gazes without slowing. None spoke. They did not need to. Their presence was the question. Why had the message not arrived? Hermes passed through regions that once would have closed behind him. They remained open now, as if the world itself were holding its breath. He thought of the city he had seen waiting. He thought of the river that had refused him. He thought of the old man on the long road who had taught him that some movements matter because they end. This task was not meant to end. It was meant to interrupt. Hermes felt the weight of that fully now. If delivered, the message would restore order. But order restored too early was indistinguishable from stagnation. Hermes slowed. The road did not approve. It tightened further, narrowing his options. Ahead, a convergence formed, a place where divine paths crossed, where decisions were usually resolved by consensus. Hermes stopped short of it. This was the last place where the message could be delivered without consequence to him. Beyond this point, choice would be remembered. Hermes looked down at the message. He did not open it. He did not destroy it. He did something else. He shifted how he held it. Not as cargo, as responsibility. The road reacted. Not with resistance, with recognition. Hermes stepped aside. Not away. Adjacent. He moved along the margin of the path, where movement still existed but destination did not dominate. The witnesses watched. Some turned away. Others lingered. Hermes continued forward, not toward delivery, but toward understanding that would not be reversed. The world adjusted around him, quietly, reluctantly, and somewhere, a task designed to be completed began to realize it might instead be fulfilled by remaining unfinished. Hermes did not hurry. That alone marked the moment as different. The roads around him continued to narrow, their edges sharpening with intention, but Hermes walked at the same measured pace he had adopted on the long wandering path. The world noticed. It always did when something moved against expectation. Hermes felt the subtle pull of destinations trying to reassert themselves, the gentle insistence that everything had a proper place and a proper time. This message had both. That was the problem. Hermes moved through regions where divine order was usually invisible, felt only as structure. Now it made itself known. Patterns repeated. Distances shortened unnaturally. Hermes passed the same crossroads twice without changing direction. This was not confusion. It was correction. The world was attempting to resolve him. Hermes stopped. The road did not dissolve beneath him, but it stiffened, as if offended by hesitation. Hermes had never stood still like this before. He was not meant to. Messengers were motion given form. To stop was to contradict his nature. Hermes closed his eyes. Not to rest. To listen. He felt the message respond again, not with warmth this time, but with pressure. It wanted to arrive. Not urgently. Inevitably. Hermes understood then that messages did not care about readiness. They cared about completion. Hermes opened his eyes and stepped off the road. Not backward. Sideways. The path reacted immediately. Edges blurred. Structure loosened. The correction failed. Hermes moved into a space where roads overlapped without hierarchy, where movement existed without command. Here, time stretched again. Hermes walked slowly. With each step, he felt consequences forming behind him. Not dramatic ones. Small shifts. Delays that accumulated. Choices that took longer to resolve. Moments where certainty did not arrive on cue. Somewhere, a god paused longer than intended. Somewhere else, a mortal decided to wait one more day. Hermes felt these ripples clearly now. The message was still intact, still complete, still capable of ending all of this. Hermes held it gently. He thought of the city that had learned to wait. He thought of the river that had refused to carry him. He thought of the place where the message had been written, how nothing there had demanded delivery. Hermes understood the truth that had been forming since the beginning. This task was never about movement. It was about restraint. Hermes continued walking through the unstructured space. The world adjusted again. Not in opposition. In adaptation. Paths formed where they were needed. Others faded. Order did not collapse. It changed its pace. Hermes felt the tension ease, not disappear. Balance was not immediate, but it was possible. Hermes did not know how long he walked. Time here was cooperative, not controlling. Eventually, the space began to thin. A familiar stillness emerged ahead, not a destination, but a recognition. Hermes slowed further. The message rested quietly now, no longer pressing, no longer pulling. It was waiting, not to arrive, to be understood fully. Hermes stepped forward, and the world, for the first time since the task began, did not attempt to guide him. The stillness ahead did not belong to a place. It belonged to a presence. Hermes recognized it before the road fully resolved. This was not a destination marked by stone or threshold, but by expectation, the quiet weight of something that had been waiting for a very long time. The space opened gently. Hermes stepped into it without resistance. There was no structure here, no boundary to cross, only a wide, calm expanse where light rested evenly and nothing pressed forward. At the center stood a figure, not imposing, not distant, simply present. Hermes stopped a short distance away. "You were not meant to come like this," the figure said quietly. Hermes inclined his head. "I know," he replied. The figure studied the message in Hermes' hands. "I have been aware of it since the moment it was formed," they said. "It was written so that I would not have to wait." Hermes felt the weight of that. To receive it, the figure continued, would end a sequence that is still unfolding. Hermes did not deny it. "That is why I slowed," he said. The figure nodded. "I felt the delay," they said. "Not as absence, as space." They stepped closer. Hermes did not retreat. "This message would have settled things," the figure said calmly. "It would have made the future cleaner." Hermes held the message steadily. "But cleaner is not always kinder," he replied. The figure regarded him for a long moment. "Then why carry it at all?" they asked. Hermes considered the question carefully. "Because restraint must be held consciously," he said. "If it is abandoned, it becomes neglect." The figure's expression softened. "You understand now," they said. Hermes did not answer. Understanding did not require confirmation. The space around them shifted subtly, not closing, not opening, settling. The figure turned away slightly, looking toward a horizon that did not move. "I will continue to wait," they said. "Not because I must, because it is still necessary." Hermes felt the message respond, not with insistence, but with acceptance. The weight in his hands changed. It was no longer urging completion. It was acknowledging choice. Hermes stepped back. "I will carry it longer," he said. The figure nodded. "That is enough," they replied. Hermes turned to leave. The space did not dissolve behind him. It remained, waiting, and Hermes walked on, no longer uncertain about what the task required. Hermes did not return to Olympus. That choice alone marked the shift. Instead, he walked the spaces between realms, the places rarely noticed because nothing dramatic ever happened there. Here, time loosened its grip again. Days did not follow one another in order. Moments expanded or folded inward depending on what was required. Hermes felt the message settle into this rhythm. It no longer resisted movement. It no longer urged arrival. It adapted. Hermes carried it as one might carry a truth that must remain intact without being spoken. As he walked, changes spread quietly, not in ways that invited notice. Councils hesitated longer before reaching certainty. Gods paused before intervening. Mortals learned, slowly, that not every question was meant to be answered immediately. None of this caused unrest. It caused adjustment. Hermes observed this without interference. This was not his domain, to shape outcomes. only to ensure that movement did not outrun meaning. At times, the message grew faint. Hermes would stop then, not out of concern, but awareness. He would rest, not in one place, but in stillness itself, and the message would return to its proper weight, present, contained, complete. Hermes began to understand that the task had never been to deliver or destroy. It had been to hold, to ensure that certainty did not arrive before wisdom could catch up. He passed through places that once would have demanded resolution. They no longer did. The world was learning a slower rhythm, not because it was forced, because it was permitted. Hermes felt the change most clearly when he passed again near the city he had once observed waiting. It had changed, not dramatically. Its streets were familiar, its people unchanged, but its decisions were made differently now, with pauses, with reflection, with a quiet understanding that not knowing immediately was not the same as being lost. Hermes did not linger. He did not need to. The message rested calmly in his hands. It was still whole, still readable, still capable of ending what it had once been meant to end. But now, it no longer demanded to. Hermes walked on, not toward a destination, not away from one, simply onward, carrying the task as it had finally revealed itself, not as something to complete, but as something that must remain unfinished for the world to continue becoming what it had not yet learned how to be. Hermes did not declare his choice. There was no moment when the world paused to witness it. No gathering of gods. No reckoning. The decision formed the way understanding often does, quietly, without demanding recognition. Hermes continued to walk, not aimlessly, with intention that no longer required a destination. The message remained unchanged in form, but its presence shifted. It no longer felt like something that awaited resolution. It felt like something that required stewardship. Hermes passed through regions where tasks usually concluded, thresholds that had once marked the end of obligation. This time, nothing closed behind him. The world did not resist. It adjusted. Hermes sensed this clearly. Paths grew less rigid. Outcomes took longer to define themselves. Certainty became something earned through patience rather than delivered by decree. The gods noticed. Not all at once. Not dramatically. Ars felt it as hesitation before conflict. Apollo felt it as uncertainty before prophecy. Athena felt it as space where judgment could mature without urgency pressing at hand. None spoke to Hermes. They did not need to. This was not defiance. It was balance. Hermes felt the message respond to this recognition. It did not weaken. It stabilized. He began to understand that the message had never been dangerous because of what it contained. It was dangerous because of when it would arrive. Hermes walked through nights that stretched longer than expected, through days that passed without the usual turning points. Mortals adjusted. They filled the gaps with thought, with debate, with responsibility. Hermes observed quietly. This was not his victory. It was not anyone's. It was the absence of premature ending. There were moments when Hermes considered releasing the message, not delivering it, not destroying it, but letting it disperse. He did not. To do so would be to erase a possibility that might one day be needed. Some endings must remain available even if unused. Hermes carried it onward. At times, the road beneath him softened until it resembled memory more than stone. At others, it sharpened again, as though testing his resolve. Hermes did not falter. He had learned that movement was not obligation. It was capacity. The world continued to respond, not with collapse, with patience. Years passed, not counted. felt. Hermes did not age. But he changed. He no longer measured tasks by completion. He measured them by consequence avoided. The message remained whole, unspoken, undelivered, and because of that, the world continued to unfold without being forced into certainty before it was ready. Hermes walked on, not because he had nowhere to stop, but because stopping would have turned stewardship into finality. And this task, the last task he had been given, was never meant to end. There came a time when Hermes reached a place where he could have stopped. He recognized it immediately, not because it was marked, but because it felt complete. The road widened gently, no longer narrowing or testing him. The air grew still in a way that did not ask for movement. This was a place where messages were sometimes set down, not delivered, not destroyed, but left behind when they were no longer needed to be carried. Hermes slowed. The message in his hands felt lighter here, not weakened, satisfied. Hermes stepped into the center of the place and stood quietly. He did not need to look around to know where he was. This was a convergence formed by long restraint, a place shaped by all the moments when answers had not been given too quickly. Hermes understood that if he left the message here, it would remain intact, available, waiting. It would not intrude on the world. It would not shape it. It would simply exist as a possibility rather than a command. Hermes considered this carefully. He thought of the beings who had refused him, the ones who had waited, the city that had learned to decide without certainty, the presence that had accepted delay as necessary. Leaving the message here would honor all of that. But Hermes sensed something else as well. If he stopped carrying it, even gently, the task would no longer belong to him. It would belong to the place. And places do not choose. They only hold. Hermes realized then that the task required more than preservation. It required judgment, not to deliver, not to erase, but to remain responsible for when the world might one day need what this message contained. Hermes closed his hand slightly. The message responded, not resisting, not insisting, accepting the decision. Hermes turned back to the road. It did not protest. It reformed beneath his feet with quiet understanding. Hermes walked on. The place remained behind him, whole, undisturbed, unchanged. A place where the message could have been left. And because it was not, the task remained alive, not as urgency, but as guardianship. Hermes continued forward. The world did not press him. It trusted him. Hermes did not mark an ending. That was the final truth of the task. There was no moment when the message ceased to matter, no instant when responsibility passed cleanly out of his hands. Instead, there came a quiet settling. The road no longer tested him. It no longer reshaped itself in response to hesitation or resolve. It simply remained. Hermes walked, not endlessly, naturally. The message rested in his hands as it had learned to do, present, contained, unchallenged. The world adjusted around him without calling attention to the change. Choices took time. Answers arrived later, not because they were withheld, but because they were allowed to form fully. Hermes passed through familiar places. Olympus, where the gods continued their concerns with slightly more patience than before. The mortal world, where questions still rose but were no longer treated as emergencies. Thresholds opened and closed as they always had. Nothing was disrupted. Nothing was forced. Hermes understood then that this had been the task all along, not to decide the fate of the message, but to ensure that fate itself was not rushed. At times, Hermes felt the message stir, not with urgency, with readiness. He did not act on it. Readiness did not require response. It required recognition. Hermes remained attentive. That was enough. He walked beneath skies that did not ask anything of him, along roads that no longer questioned his presence. He was no longer carrying something unfinished. He was carrying something unforced. And that made all the difference. If one day the message needed to be delivered, Hermes would know. Not because the world demanded it, but because the world would finally be prepared to receive it without losing what it had learned in the waiting. Until then, Hermes walked. The roads remained open. The night passed gently. And somewhere between motion and stillness, the task continued, not as obligation, not as delay, but as balance held quietly in careful hands.